Good morning, everybody. This is the January 13, 2023 meeting of the 2019 HB 737 Study Commission for the Environmental and Health Effects of Perfluorinated and Polyfluorinated chemicals. First of all, I guess we have some new members from the legislature, so could we have you introduce yourselves? Representative, I'm going to probably butcher your name, Shwala. Well, welcome to our study commission. I don't know, are you able to hear us?
Is that me you're referring to?
Yes.
No, I'm not a representative, sorry. I'm from the HHS as a presenter today.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
Oh, no problem at all. I mean, I wish I could be representative in the future.
I'm sorry. So I don't know if we have our new appointees yet. If anybody has any insight on that, let me know. Otherwise, welcome back, everyone.
Mr. Chairman, do we know who those new appointees are?
I do not know.
Okay.
So I haven't been informed, and I know several of our members have other commitments today and are not present. We don't have a quorum, but we'll proceed anyway, and we won't do official business today, but we have important progress to move forward. And Lorraine Allen has very kindly and graciously agreed to take our minutes here today. We are going to skip over, because we don't have a quorum, acceptance of the December minutes, and also acceptance of a resignation from Representative Cretion. That will have to wait until our next meeting. And so we will begin with the DHHS cancer report update. And hopefully you've all received, probably haven't had a chance to review the materials forwarded just before 10 o'clock. So thank you, Dr. Bush, and we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm joined today by several colleagues at the Department of Health and Human Services. So our director, Patricia Tilley, is here. Chawei Chawla, our Bureau Chief of Health Statistics and Data Informatics, and Whitney Hammond, our Chronic Disease Director. So I will turn it over to them to share some of our recent findings related to Merrimack and the surrounding communities. Thank you all for being here today.
Thanks, Katie. I'll jump in and go first. So again, good morning, everyone. My name is Tricia Tilley. I'm the Director of Public Health. I can't get past saying I'm the Director of Public Health without noting that I have a respiratory illness right now. So my voice may go in and out. I encourage all of you to take good care not to have a respiratory illness this winter, because they're going around like crazy. So take good care of yourselves. So with that, taken care of, I want to thank you for inviting us to present this data today. Whitney Hammond, our Section Chief for Cancer and Chronic Disease, and Chawei Chawla, our Bureau Chief for Public Health Statistics Informatics, are going to provide the real meat and potatoes of today's presentation. I'm just going to give a few sort of warming up remarks. You know, I know that this commission knows well that the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the products we use, and all the conditions in which we live, learn, work, play, all affect our health. And we also know that almost 40% of us will be diagnosed with some type of cancer over the course of our lifetimes. We certainly know that some of the risk factors for those cancers, they include your genetics, your smoking, your inactivity, your alcohol use, occupational exposures. And often it's a mix of some of those factors that we never fully understand that leads to that cancer. We have two documents to share today, a follow-up report on kidney cancer in Merrimack that Whitney will describe, and a brief data summary of cancer incidence in the 3 towns of Bedford, Litchfield, and Londonderry that Chawei is going to lead. But before we dig into the details of the data, I think it's important to ground us in some of the history and some of the why we do this work and some of its limitations. You know, our job in public health is to protect and promote the health of all people in every community. We assess and monitor health status, and we look at the factors that impact health, And within the constraints and resources we have and our statutory authority, we investigate and address those health problems and hazards. And one of our most important jobs in public health is to be a credible and consistent source of data and information. And so that is our commitment to you and to everyone in the state. In 2018, DHHS looked at cancer rates in Merrimack for many different cancers based upon a request. And at that time, there were no cancers that were higher than expected. By 2020, we were distracted by a pandemic, but in 2021, DHHS redid this analysis with new data and found a higher than expected number of cases of kidney cancer in Merrimack, which was a signal to look more closely. And over the course of 2022, we provided this information to you at the Commission, and we worked with partners and experts to look more closely at kidney cancer in this area to help us develop a clearer understanding of whether anything might easily explain this signal. And that is the report that we're going to talk about today that summarizes that data analysis and our decision making. So what did we find? The additional analysis provided some good context about kidney cancer in Merrimack and how, in many ways, this kidney cancer looks similar to the rest of New Hampshire in terms of the ages of people being diagnosed, the specific types, and even that we're all seeing a rising rate of kidney cancer. Whitney's going to review this data and the report and talk us through the recommendations of the group that worked on this. And so as she goes through that overview and those recommendations, I would encourage all of us to remember that nothing in this report is able to answer a question about the cause of any individual kidney cancer. And remember that while PFAS was the contaminant of concern that led us to this initial analysis in 2018 and the reanalysis in 2021 and our work in 2022, we can't rule out that other potential risk factors may exist for this particular cancer. We can't yet draw a straight line from a PFAS exposure to these unexpected cancers. And with additional resources and partnerships, next steps could be pursued, but even with investments, those assessments may have limited benefit in answering people's very real and very important questions about their own health. So we look forward to your feedback and recommendations as how do you best use and share this information in this updated report? How can it inform the work of the Commission? And is there other information that your communities need to know? When Whitney wraps up, Chaway will take the lead in talking about the data summary of cancers in the towns of Bedford, Litchfield, and Londonderry. You're going to recall that the Commission asked us to explore the cancer incidence in these towns. Data for that report, like our other reports, comes from the New Hampshire Cancer Registry. And in this particular case, it's a combined year time period from about 2009 to about 2018. The tables that Chaway is going to describe the standard incidence ratio, or SIR, showing the actual observed or reported number of cancer diagnoses and the expected number of cancer diagnoses predicted for the population of those towns. And that's based on how old people are, their race, their ethnicity. The observed and the expected number of cancer diagnoses are then divided to get that standard incidence ratio. And Chaway, when she goes in, will remind us how to understand those SIR calculations and what the confidence intervals mean. Looking at all these factors is what makes these analyses complex and time-consuming. But they help us clear out some of the noise. It also helps us get closer to comparing apples to apples. For example, when you take a look at the age of a population in account, it's important to remember in these calculations because cancer is so strongly associated with increasing age. Remember, almost 40% of us are going to have some type of cancer over some time in our lifetime. And, you know, this is the part where you close your ears if you don't want a spoiler. But for those of us who read the last page of the book, you'll want to know that we did not find elevated kidney cancer in these three towns, the Bedford, Litchfield, and Londonderry. However, we did find in each of the three towns a higher observed than expected of other types of cancer. And one town even shows a lower observed than expected number of cancer for another specific type. So much like the Merrimack report, it's important to reflect on the limitations of this data. As rich as the cancer registry is, we may have data that's incomplete or it's non-existent, and that can impact our results. For example, cancer cases are very likely higher than reflected in all of New Hampshire due to a delay in receiving cancer data from the Veterans Administration. That is a critically important population, and we don't have complete data from them. And we also know that we suppress data for all cancer types when the observed number of cases is less than 5. And of course, there are lots of reasons why cancer diagnoses may be higher in one community compared to the other, even with our SIR calculations. Differences in age, sex, genetics, individual behaviors, the overall healthiness of a community, their access to medical care, to cancer screening, and differences in exposures to carcinogens, differences in behavioral risks, and certainly differences in occupational exposures. And then you just add in a little bit of random and chance occurrence, and we need to be thoughtful of all of those types of limitations. We know, again, cancers are caused by a combination of factors that interact in ways that are not fully understood. And as people move around from town to town, state to state, it becomes even harder to determine the impact of a particular environmental exposure on a particular disease occurrence. And it's even more important to consider that the data presented in this summary can't tell an individual person why they may have developed a specific cancer. And it can't tell a community why it might have different levels of cancer compared to other areas in the state. It's important information. It is certainly not meaningless. It just doesn't tell the whole story. So before I hand it off to Whitney, I just want to remind us all that while we can't provide all the information that people want, public health can continue to provide support to this commission and to the public by providing the data analysis about cancer incidence and prevalence among different populations, different groups in New Hampshire. We can continue to work with our partners in DES to answer people's questions about what we know and what we don't know regarding the health impact of PFAS. We're going to monitor the emerging science. We're going to monitor emerging clinical guidelines around health monitoring of PFAS exposure. And we're always available to provide information on evidence-based cancer risk reduction and connecting people with prevention, screening, and treatment resources. So while there are statistical challenges that make it difficult to directly associate environmental exposures with an unusual pattern of cancer, public health remains committed to working in partnership to better understanding these patterns. But we can't do the work alone. We have limitations in our capacity, our resources, and technical and research expertise. But we are rich in partnerships, and we are open to your feedback and to your recommendations. I want to thank our team, Katie, who has been so committed to this commission, as well as Whitney and Xiaowei for their analysis and their presentations today. And of course, a special thank you goes out to our partners in DES who have given us tremendous insight and feedback. So Whitney, why don't you take it from here?
Hi, let's see if I can pull off screen sharing. 1 second. People can see your screen. Can I get a thumbs up? Can you see the PowerPoint slides? Yeah?
No.
Nope, we're seeing the Word
Nope.
document. I think we're seeing Trisha's Word document. I don't know. Amy, we want to make sure Whitney's sharing screen. Or maybe it's a different screen.
It says Whitney sharing. So when you go to show screen under your dashboard, you can see under the big circle with the arrow screen. If you hit that down arrow, you should be able to choose which screen you want to show.
All I have is like the little, it's like a circle with a monitor image, and I click on it and it doesn't give me any choices when I go to share.
It should be a circle with like a play symbol.
Okay, let me try that one.
So we're still seeing your Word document. Do you have multiple screens?
Yes.
underneath that play circle, you should see some like a grayed out box that says screen, like
Yep.
with a little down carrot.
Yep.
If you click on that down carrot, it should give you an option of what screen you
Okay.
want to show.
All right, let me try this one and hopefully that'll show you guys. Is that my
There we go.
slides?
Yes, there
Yep.
we go.
All right, and I'm not going to play around with making it in presenter mode because I just am technically challenged this morning. So, hi everyone, I'm Whitney Hammond. I'm the administrator for the chronic disease section at the Division of Public Health that includes the cancer programs. I'm twinning Trisha with a respiratory illness, so I apologize for being stuffy. And I am here, I'm going to give a pretty high level overview of what's in the cancer incidence report for Merrimack, January 2023, that folks would have received prior to this call. I didn't go into the detail. There aren't data tables in my presentation, but all that information is in the written report, and I'm happy to, have conversation about it. But I wanted to keep this at a sort of higher level of the key things that we found. So I think, is this moving? There. So I wanted to revisit the timeline, although Trisha did a great job of capturing the sort of key steps that have occurred around this. I put in this check engine light for those of you who were here back in December when I presented last to this commission. You might recall I used this as a sort of way of capturing in my mind what an SIR really means or how we sort of view it at the health department. And I said it's like a check engine light in your car. It goes off, it's a signal that maybe something's up and maybe you should bring it to the garage, but it doesn't tell you what the thing is that's wrong with your car. So it's not like a check your oil light or the brake light or the battery light that really tells you what's wrong with the car. So 2021, we got that check engine light around kidney cancers. I did want to include this because I kind of lose sight of it. And I think it's important to kind of give a little more context to when we say more or higher, that the magnitude of that was 19 cases more than would be expected from 2009 to 2018. And as a result of that, we did a fair amount of work over the last year with a lot of partners who, some of them are on the call, and Trisha, gave kind of a nod to DES has been like a huge partner for us, our academic partners at Dartmouth. And so the results of all of that work are captured in the report, and I'm going to give you the sort of so what of it. The goals of what we set out to do over the last year in terms of understanding that signal or that check engine light, there were really three. I would say the primary goal that we had was to really make a decision of whether to close the investigation into kidney cancer in Merrimack. And we really wanted to do that looking at two sets of things. One would be looking at additional incidence data. And again, Trisha kind of gave you the highlight of, that we didn't find a huge amount of difference in terms of our sort of tried and true incidence data. I'll go in a little more detail in the future slide on that. And also just sort of looking at what we know, based on science at this point in time and based on Merrimack and what we know about, environmental contaminations and, bring those two things together to really think through recommendations and next steps. The second goal, I think, really did emerge from that last 737 commission meeting that I presented at. And this was to really kind of respond to people's concerns around, hey guys, are you even using the right reference population when you do those kinds of calculations to get that signal? And so we really heard people's concerns about that. And we did a lot of work to do, what we call sensitivity testing, but to really try out, okay, what does it look like if we deviate from our standard of just using the rest of New Hampshire and we actually strategically remove some communities that are around Merrimack that have that same known exposure, in this case, PFAS. So we sought to do that, and you can see a lot of the detailed data in the report. But again, I'll give you the sort of high level result. And then the final thing somewhat touches to the data request that Jiawei will talk about. But the third goal was, again, to respond to concerns that had come up in the last 737 commission meeting when I presented, which was that just folks saying, okay, well, you found this higher than expected number of kidney cancers in Merrimack. what about some of these other towns with this same known exposure? And so we did look to see if we got that same signal in not just Litchfield, Londonderry, and Bedford, but those additional towns, Amherst, Manchester, Nashua, and Hudson. So I'll talk through what we found in terms of that. So those were the 3 big goals for the last year. Key findings. So again, Trisha covered this, but one of the biggest findings, and you'll see some different data charts and a lot of written explanation in the report around this, but if I were to really summarize it, in all of that looking at additional data, we didn't find anything in particular that jumped out in terms of understanding that check engine light, that signal around kidney cancer in Merrimack. So for example, you could potentially see, so we looked at things like the age that people are getting diagnosed. So sometimes you might actually see, wow, people are actually getting diagnosed with kidney cancer a lot earlier in this community. And that can be sort of, again, like another good, useful piece of information about things look different here. That's not what we found. So the age at diagnosis was pretty comparable between people in Merrimack and people in the rest of New Hampshire. The term kidney cancer is a sort of broad umbrella under which there are many different types of kidney cancers. So renal carcinoma being, probably the most common one. So we looked a little more in depth beyond just kidney cancer, and we looked at, what types of kidney cancer are people being diagnosed with in Merrimack, and how does that compare to the rest of New Hampshire? And again, we did not find any significant differences in terms of the types of kidney cancer, which is again just useful information that okay, so we're not seeing wow, it's this very uncommon type that we're seeing here. And then the last thing that we really looked at in terms of additional data analysis was the trend over time. When we look at cancer data in New Hampshire, and when you look at a town level, the numbers can be very, very small from year to year in terms of people diagnosed. So, you could be looking at maybe 2 people that get diagnosed, maybe 10 people that get diagnosed. And when you look at, sort of a trend over multiple years, a difference of 5 people can really change the overall numbers. And so we did look at sort of year by year diagnoses to make sure that it wasn't, oh, back in 2009, there happened to be twice as many people diagnosed. And so that's what led to this signal. So what we found was no, the trend has been increasing over time. So we're just seeing more and more kidney cancers in Merrimack. And then we also compared that to the rest of New Hampshire and saw a consistent trend. So it didn't look any different. I put an asterisk next to that, and we do discuss this in the report. It was sort of interesting. We did look at the rest of the United States and didn't see that same trend of an increase. And so actually at a national level, kidney cancer has been stable. So that was something else that we looked at. So that's the sort of takeaway in terms of our additional incidence data analysis. The second key finding was around that question of, are we using the right comparison population? So you'll see detail around the different calculations when we compared to the rest of New Hampshire. And then what we did was we compared the rates in Merrimack to the rest of New Hampshire, and we removed those neighboring towns with the known PFAS exposure, just to see, does this actually lead to a louder signal? The results of that were that it didn't actually change the magnitude or the sort of the level of the signal. It really stayed consistent, and it just showed that same excess number of kidney cancer cases, which I believe was 19. So our conclusion was, actually, for a reference population, New Hampshire, the rest of New Hampshire has been the standard, and it was pretty consistent, and we would, kind of continue with that as a reference population moving forward. The third goal being to look at kidney cancer rates in those surrounding towns with known exposures resulted in us finding that actually none of the other towns have a significant SIR. So we're not getting that check engine light signal for those surrounding towns. And you can see the details of those specific SIRs in the written report. So those were sort of the key findings around those 3 goals. our conclusions, again, this is going to overlap with a lot of what Tricia said earlier. This was big. This was important for me as I did this work over the last year, was to just really continually be reminded of the work that we're doing here and in this report, and what we're capturing just does not include any information about exposure history to PFAS. So like we have talked about that it would be a part of a next step to start to actually gather information from these individuals who have been diagnosed with kidney cancer about where they've lived, whether they know anything about their level of exposure to PFAS. So that's something that could be done in the future, but that we just don't have right now. So I think it's important, and we kept returning to that as an important thing to flag for this report. So this report doesn't assess that, and so we're not able to say that that signal is connected to any particular risk factor or particular contamination. Another big conclusion was further health study, if done correctly, could definitely help contribute to understanding a potential exposure or risk factor that contributed to the excess of cancers in the Merrimack area. But that if there is further study, it would take considerable time and resources, and that it would require partnership with an academic organization or a research organization, and couldn't necessarily be, squarely on DHHS to take that next step. And then this is super important, is that even after further study, so even if we're able to have that partnership and do that next step of getting somebody's residential history and exposure history, that it's very important to temper expectations that the end result may still be that it remains unclear why those kidney cancers are higher in that community. And I just think, as we think about our next steps, it's important to hold that knowledge, as we think through what to do next. So recommendations and next steps that we included in that report are that the department recommends that the investigation move to phase 3. I'm referencing phases that I shared back in a year ago, so I apologize for anyone who wasn't there or can't remember a year ago. But I had sort of talked about the department's protocol around investigating cancer concerns in communities. And phase 3 really refers to that next step of gathering additional information from folks that have kidney cancer and working with academic partners to understand what kind of a study design might be possible to try and answer questions about exposures and other risk factors for folks with kidney cancer in the area. So the recommendation was, yeah, there could be some benefit to doing that, given that sort of, the piece around, but that would require a lot of resources and partnership, and again, may not result in us finding answers that people are really looking for. The other thing in terms of just next steps is we did want to flag that while it's not answering people's questions about, the connection between PFAS and kidney cancer for them or their individual cancers, we do still have a cancer program at the department that's very much committed to being a resource for folks who are either concerned about their risk for kidney cancer, and we can provide education around evidence-based strategies and services that are available to reduce risk, based on known risk factors for kidney cancer. So we're available in that regard. We're also available to just answer people's questions about what we know and what we don't know with regard to this data analysis and this concern around kidney cancer. And again, that we continue to sort of do what we can around referring healthcare providers who are also responding to people's concerns around their kidney cancer and PFAS exposure. So those are the sort of recommendations and next steps. And again, that's captured in the written report that you all have. And I believe that's it for my presentation. So I will hand it over, I think, to Jawei at this point, and I will attempt to stop screen sharing. Let's see, stop. There we go.
All right, Jawei, take it away.
Okay, So let me check the screen that I'm going to share. Can you see my screen? Are you seeing a
Yes.
PowerPoint?
We see the PowerPoint. It's not in presenter mode, but we see the PowerPoint.
Okay. I cannot see what I'm sharing. That's the part that I feel a little bit scary. So like Winnie, I'm not going to show the PowerPoint, I mean the slideshow more. So my name is Jiahui Chawla. I'm the Bureau Chief of Public Health Statistics Informatics in the Division of Public Health Services. So thank you for having me today to present the data part in those two reports. So since Winnie and Tricia have addressed a good amount on the data finding, for my presentation today, I will focus on the tables that we present in the two reports and focusing on the Merrimack, Town Merrimack, and also the other 3 towns that are in the data summary report. So the first slide that I have here is from the Merrimack kidney cancer data summary to show that all the cancer types most of the cancer types in the town Merrimack. The data source that we use is from the New Hampshire State Cancer Registry data, and the data year is the year of diagnosis between 2009 and 2018. So from what you can see here on the first slide, the table that I capture, the cancer types that have SIR, the standardized incidence ratio that is above 1 to show the increase of the calculation between the observed number of cancer cases versus the expected number of cancer cases. So from this table, kidney cancer from this time period of diagnosis stands out on the SIR calculation, which shows that the kidney cancer is significantly, statistically significantly higher compared to the rest of the state, using rest of state as a reference population. It's about 42% increase in this time frame. For other cancer types that are on this table, they all indicate an exit, between the observed number of cases versus the expected number of cases. However, the confidence interval does not show any significance for those cancers other than kidney cancer. Sorry. The next slide that I have here is to focus on kidney cancers and compare to the neighbor towns that around Merrimack. So the same year of diagnosis between 2009 and 2018, for the neighbor towns, 8 neighbor towns, from the statistic standpoint, only Merrimack has significantly higher based on the SIR calculation to compare the observed number of cases versus the expected number of cases on kidney cancer. For other towns, 3 towns and city of Manchester, they all the number or the data indicates that they have an increase between 5% to 18% increase, but from the significance, it does not show any statistically significance to present that those 3 geographic areas are higher or lower between the observed number of cases versus the expected number of cases. The rest of the town and city of Nashua, they all have SIR below 1, which shows that is a decrease compared the observed and the expected. So the next slide is just to echo one point that Winnie talked about by looking at the New Hampshire for the 5 years rate between 2015 and 2019. For kidney cancer, even though the national trend shows that it's stable in New Hampshire, from the data standpoint, it does show that the trend in rate is about 1.2% per year. It's a little bit, increase from this 5 time period as a yearly average. So the next slide I'm going to show is from the table from the summary data report for the 3 counts, Bedford, Litchfield, and Londonderry. Here, the table I reordered the cancer type based on the SIR and also the confidence interval. For those 3 counts, like what Trisha and also the Whitney indicated, that the kidney cancer does not have any significance in terms of the SIR calculation, and by looking at the confidence interval. In the town Bedford, we do see breast cancer in female does have higher SIR, and also from the confidence interval, it shows that the breast cancer in Bedford is significantly higher between the observed number compared to the expected number using the rest of New Hampshire as a referencing population. For Litchfield, there are two cancer types that we highlighted here. However, because the brain cancer has a little bit small number of 14 cases as observed cases, we would like to use extra caution to make some statement on the brain cancer in Litchfield. But by looking at the prostate cancer, which shows SIR as 1.37, means that this is a 37% increase compared to the observed number versus the expected number. And also by looking at the confidence interval, the lower confidence interval is above 1. Excuse me, it's above 1. So just by looking at the data, it indicates that for prostate cancer in Litchfield for this between 2009 and 2018, it is significantly higher compared the observed to the expected number. Similar with the Londonderry, we do see melanoma of skin as highlighted here in the town of Londonderry with about a 29% increase. And by looking at the lower confidence interval, it also shows, the data also shows that for melanoma for this time frame, it is significantly higher compared the observed versus the expected number in Londonderry. For the presentation here, the slide I showed here, I did not include the other cancer types, which you can find the whole, the entire table in the report that we provided. So that's all from me from the data standpoint. I have my contact information here. If anyone has any questions, feel free to contact us. Thank you. No, I just have
Thank you, Chale. So I think that's it from Public Health. I don't know if there are questions to entertain or not. I do. Laureen, did you have a question?
Yes, I'm trying to read my notes. I had a couple of things. Thank you. That was really informative, and I appreciate the time you took in really trying to address, the limits in the why, right? And what I'm hearing here is we really have to put some resources into education and risk prevention. So broadening out from the Health Commission in this area, it really troubled me to hear that we see this trend increasing in time in New Hampshire, not just here, in Merrimack, in the surrounding towns. So there's a few things. I have 2 questions, and then there's a couple of things that came to mind that I don't know if you can do or may not be helpful. one of the things that stuck out to me when you were looking at the other towns, right? And you were saying, okay, here are the other towns. So if we look at Manchester and Nashua, for example, we know they have a varied water supply source. We know, for example, that the reservoir in Manchester has tested pretty good, since we've been testing for just PFAS. I don't know about other contaminants in Manchester, but overall, when we look at these towns, I don't think you have a way. It would be like crazy work to do with DES, right? To say how much of this is groundwater, be it we have in Merrimack, what we have that really stands out to me is be it private wells or MVD wells, they're all groundwater. We're all pulling from the groundwater. So I look at those other towns and I kind of say to myself, I don't think there's a way to really tease that out. What percentage of those communities is drinking groundwater and what percentage is drinking? Pennachuck has a variety of sources for their water, I believe, in Manchester. And then I don't even know about the delivery systems. I think some of these towns do pull in parts of the town, right? Tap into Manchester and Nashua in particular. So that strikes me as kind of one of those problems that I don't know that we can really do. It would take getting out there. I don't even know how you could do that. But so I don't know that those numbers are really getting at what we need to get. You know what I'm saying? It's groundwater, I'm guessing, that is really problematic in the area. So that's just kind of a comment about the other towns. I also think we see this in other communities. I think there's a pattern of like kind of gradiated exposure. We saw it in our limited blood sampling, right? Where closer to Saint-Gobain versus, we see it in the data. We see it in DES's mapping. As you go further from Saint-Gobain, in general, levels drop off. But there's also speed bumps depending on what. So I'm guessing with health, we have so many health disruptions that are connected to PFAS exposure that are non-cancerous, that are very challenging to people and very hard to manage and are often not screened for, in particular in younger people. So that becomes another problem. How do we know the impact of the gradation of exposure, right? So I think what I'm describing is like the ultimate health study that we're never going to get, right? That pulls together the DES data, the DHH data. That would be the gold standard, right? So that's what I would love. The other thing is there anything in your work in the data that looks at childhood cancer in particular? I'm asking this because I live here in Merrimack, but I have a counseling practice in Milford, and I'm very tapped into the greater Milford community. And I'm seeing this pattern of childhood cancers, in particular rare brain cancers. I know of 4 cases in Milford, 1 in Lineborough, 1 in Hollis, and these are from GoFundMe's put on the Milford Facebook group, and I've heard it from some of my clients. I know of at least 2 cases since last summer in Merrimack, and I'm talking about children between 8 months and 4 years of age. Very troubling. So I know of in this town, in those towns, and that's all I know of. There could be more, 7 cases that I've heard of since last summer. So that kind of bothers me, of course. And I know in Hollis, the area of Hollis where some of these troubles are happening is groundwater that shares the same qualities of the MVD wells that sit in that area. So I'm putting that out there, and I don't know, are you looking at, childhood and brain cancers in particular? I think I asked this question in the past a couple of years ago, and the answer was the numbers are lower and confidentiality. And so what's the deal with the kids, and how do we get at that? That because I'm worried about the health patterns that I'm seeing that are not captured by this data. And can you get that data?
Sure. So yes, we can get the data, but I'd turn it over to Whitney or Chai-Wei to talk about what they've seen so far.
Yeah.
I can start off. So thank you, Lorraine, because you clearly understand a lot of this, and I know you understand a lot of this, and you've described a lot of the limitations even beyond what we presented today. So I kind of jotted down, I hope I hit the things that you brought up, but feel free to tell me if I missed something. So I think you did a really nice job of summarizing exactly that limitation of like, without an additional health study where you can start to get that rich information about things like where was somebody in a town, and then what was their water source and what was their level of exposure. You're absolutely right that, yeah, that you just sort of are left at a place where you can't answer certain questions. I think that's sort of, that's the end goal of potentially partnering with an academic group that really has that skill set and the ability to maybe even go after additional grant funding to support that kind of a rich data collection. So I think that's you gave a nice example of a community where, yeah, just looking at the SIR doesn't tell you everything. And again, if you're wondering why I keep using that check engine analogy, it's because my husband is an auto tech, and he would tell you, you get cars that need to be fixed that don't have a check engine light on, you know, so it's just as possible that, you know, there's something going on and you're not getting that signal. So I think that's a really important point. The other point that you had made, Laureen, about other health impacts, absolutely is critical. I know you know this, and I certainly know this from responding to people's phone calls and emails. Kidney cancer and cancer alone is not, it's a very important health impact and a big concern for people, and a very serious health issue. But there are so many other health impacts that are important to know more about. And I know you know this is just the way that we are sort of set up at the health department. We don't have that same, even though the cancer registry has its limitations, people always are disappointed with how the time lag, and they're always like, why don't we have 2021 data? And I'm like, oh, Jawei can tell you all about data and making sure it's complete and high quality, and so there's that delay. But even that we don't have for a lot of these other health conditions that people are experiencing and wondering about, what's causing it. So it's another limitation. But again, maybe if we were doing a health study and we had a lot of resources and some smart partners, we could get a little more information around that. Pediatric cancers, again, I'm like, Laureen, you're like an expert. So yes, you're right. This has come up before. And you're absolutely correct that it gets challenging. It's not from a confidentiality perspective per se, but there are very small numbers of pediatric cancers. And Jawei could talk a little bit about our data suppression rules and what we have in place to just protect people's confidentiality. So when you get into at a town level, cancers in children that are under like 13, you're probably going to run into some issues of data suppression, just because, again, we do make an effort to make sure that, we're not sharing people's personal health information. That said, we did receive additional funding through, I can't even keep the years straight at this point, but we got a funding through the legislature a while back to support work with Dartmouth around pediatric cancers in New Hampshire. So there was a statewide conference where we brought together experts. There was some emphasis on the cancers that had been found to be higher in the Seacoast area. So there was a lot of focus on rhabdomyosarcoma, but then also childhood cancers in general, and sort of what do we know about environmental causes of childhood cancers. We also funded a pretty extensive literature review where we had folks at Dartmouth comb through the literature and really, it's a pretty dense article around what we know and what the evidence shows around causes of childhood cancer. So there actually, a lot of good work came out of that. The other thing I wanted to make a plug for, and this connects to your first comment about the importance of education around known risk factors and how people can reduce their risk, is we at the health department are in the process of writing our new state cancer plan, which is where we really look at the data in New Hampshire and understand, things like, oh, kidney cancer is increasing. What do we know about that? And what should we be doing at a state level to try and change that trend? And so we are right now in the process of doing our data, analysis, looking at cancer just overall, and pediatric cancer is absolutely going to be a part of that. And it has never been in previous state cancer plans. And I really think a lot of the work that's been done in the last decade here has helped us to get to that point. So I think, again, things are moving in a good direction with pediatric cancers. But again, I mean, Joey, you can chime in too about the data suppression. I know you work with the numbers and probably understand what you've actually, yeah, you've analyzed childhood cancers way back, so.
Yeah, so thank you. I just want to echo back on the water source. So even though lots of towns in New Hampshire do have groundwater as their water source, but I think it's very hard to identify whether they really use the groundwater or whether they purchase the water from the convenience store as a daily drinking water source. So that's the part that I think it's good that you pointed out as well. In terms of childhood cancer or the cancer data, it is true that childhood cancer number in New Hampshire is pretty small. So we have to aggregate multiple years and cannot really present in a very small geographic area. The current general suppression rule in our health data is to suppress any cells with the number between 1 and 4. But the national CDC standard is to suppress between 1 and 19. So if we would like to use a CDC standard, then for the childhood cancer, it would be very difficult for us to present any meaningful number. So for New Hampshire as a small state, we make it down to between 1 and 4. But even though with 1 and 4 suppression rule, it still have some difficulty for us to present a certain type of childhood cancer. The other part is pediatric cancer has its own cancer coding. It's a little bit different when we look at the overall across the age in the entire population. So it has a specific cancer coding to identify the brain cancer or other childhood cancer. For this part, we can look into the data and see whether we can get enough and meaningful data to present by different type of childhood cancer, and maybe work with Winnie's group and Trisha, to see if we are able to present another data report as well. In terms of a cancer registry operation, it is true that for the cancer data we do have 2 years data lag, particularly because some facilities that they have difficulty to report the cancer cases or record to the cancer registry due to the maybe the technology, they change their reporting platform and they need to do the reconnection, etc. We do see 2 years lag. And from the most recent cancer data that we received from the cancer registry, the 2019 data is complete. For 2020, we only have about 80% completeness, 80% completeness, and that is because of the COVID. Lots of facilities are delaying their reporting, and for some big hospitals in New Hampshire, they also had difficulties on reporting cancer cases to our cancer registry. So the registry is working very hard to work with other facilities to expedite their reporting for 2020 data to the registry. So that is the delay, where the delay is about. So did I miss anything?
It strikes me, I get it, everything is slow. Investigations are slow, remediation is slow, health support is slow, everything in this journey, 7-year journey, and I know that. It's frustrating federally, in the state, locally, it's just the way it is. Is there a way that most of these children are down in Boston, a couple, may also be at Dartmouth. Is there a way that the state could reach out to the facilities that treat these young children with cancers, and they could just report that to the state in a quicker, like, hey, we have a case, because it wouldn't take a lot of resources, because it's not, thankfully, hundreds of kids, I hope, but it would be in that one area. Maybe there's a way that we can outreach to say, can we get those case reports in a quicker fashion. Because when you look at a trend in children, you know, if you find out 3-4 years down the road that there's an upward trend, sooner or later it gets identified and the cases are coming out. Like I said, you know, there's a number that I know of from maybe July on that I've heard of. And I get privacy, of course, in the work that I do, but I also instruct in this day of social media that they're all, you know, GoFundMes. So maybe there's a way to get that information for children quicker. And then my last question is basically, what do you guys need? You know, what do you need? Because you always talk about, you know, the bigger studies, the academic partners. Is that the only venue, or is there something helpful on a state level that you can have increased capacity funding specifically earmarked to some work that you would like to expand on? You know, this is the place to communicate that either here or in a email or call to someone. We have at least one you know, Gary is here now too, and Maureen. So, you know, they know how to turn that stuff into the sausage machine of LSRs and all that stuff, thankfully. So what do you need? Are there things that you would have on your wish list that would allow you to do more?
I'll take a first swing at this, and then I'll let Chawei or Whitney to jump in. So yes, you know, I think there are some opportunities with, you know, some additional resources that are not insignificant, to start looking at feasibility. And again, it's painfully slow, Lori, and it's so hard. I mean, it's hard to even hear you say that back to us. We know that that's the work we live in, but it is such an incredible limitation that it just takes a long time to get that data and have that data be of high quality and to be able to act on the data. I think it's particularly hard now after we just lived through COVID, where we were able to get test results in a day and we know about vaccinations, right? You know, we would have daily updates on our numbers, but something as complex as cancer, we don't have that ability to turn that sort of everyday number and have that tick on the website. So I totally get your frustration on that. I know that there's some bills that are likely to be introduced this session that would talk about potentially some sort of PFAS registry or health assessment or a feasibility study. The language has been sort of changing over time. So I anticipate we will see something in the legislature, and we're certainly happy to work with anyone who's introducing that to make sure that it makes sense and that the resources are appropriate. It'll be a tight budget year. There's no doubt about that. So there's that struggle as well of, you know, there will need to be resources, but to get that through this particular biennium is always a challenge. But we're happy to work with our legislative partners in any of their interest in this area. Whitney or Chawei, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I have two. So I wanted to go back to the question around, can we do something to be able to get information about kids diagnosed with cancer quickly and potentially from places like Massachusetts, where we know a lot of kids are going? And the answer is yes. And that's something we actually do already. One of the things, so we have a contract with Dartmouth. They're the folks that operate the cancer registry. They have really, really good relationships with all the surrounding states. They can actually just they can just pick up the phone and call the other registries and say, can you give us a heads up when and if you get any, you know, any case that fits this definition? So for example, I get contacted pretty much almost immediately when a state like in New Hampshire or Massachusetts or Maine, if they get a kid that's diagnosed with rhabdomyosarcoma, because that was the cancer of concern in the Seacoast Cancer Cluster investigation. And again, we're not talking about huge numbers of people. It's sort of 3 individuals in those different states, and they all know to be on the lookout and to give a heads up. We do get what's called a rapid report from hospitals. So we do get very like timely information. It's just before we can use the data to do analysis, like all the important stuff Chawei does, that's the stuff that is laggy. So like you can't crunch numbers until you have something to compare it to and you feel like it's 95% complete. But we can definitely be quickly looking at like, wow, we could see, you know, like we've got 3 new cases of this particular type of cancer in kids. So that's that answers that question. We could absolutely do that, and we do. In terms of the resources, I only wanted to make an additional plug around. So a lot of this work has been funded by a CDC grant. It's called the National Program for Cancer Registries. That funding has pretty much dwindled over time. And we at Public Health have been kind of creative and scrappy about how we figure out how to keep things going, even with that loss of grant funding. So we've used our preventive services block grant, which is a little more flexible, but comes from CDC. We've also over time made requests of getting just a little bit more from state general funds to support that work, and we put that into the contract with Dartmouth. Jaway has taken on an enormous new grant from CDC to support public health infrastructure in New Hampshire. And so we've been really carefully thinking about how to put those funds towards supporting our work in this area. So I know right now we're trying to figure out how to use some of that funding to be able to really get someone for the cancer epidemiologist position. I know you guys are aware that that position's been vacant for quite a while. I've been attempting to recruit somebody, and we've had challenges, as many people do right now with recruitment. But so we put funds from that flexible bucket around infrastructure to try and really find someone, and someone who's, you know, very well qualified. The other thing that we're kind of thinking through right now is if we could put some of that funding towards also a position that's more dedicated to doing the community engagement piece around this. So not to, like, you know, whatever, I can't think of the phrase, but not to complain, but this is something I've kind of taken on in addition to all my other hats. And I know that's not the level of like the staffing that's really needed to do this and do it in a more timely manner. I think of it as like the coordinating all these like talented experts, whether they're the people from DES or our partners at Dartmouth. It can be like herding cats. And like for me to take that on in addition to a lot of my other like management stuff isn't probably, you know, the best use of resources in terms of doing it in a timely manner. So I know Jaway's been really, and Trisha have been thinking about how do we use this infrastructure funding to get us, you know, to a good place, but that will, I believe, run out in 4 years. So that's another thing for us to maybe think about in terms of our capacity. And Jaway, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, so basically, cancer registry, they do receive rapid reports within 45 days of the diagnosis, and also the definitive report after 6 months after the diagnosis. However, cancer registry defined that the rapid report, the data quality is not really good. So for the rapid report that are reported within 45 days, we use this as a data quality purpose to see if those cases are finally submitted, you know, after 6 months after the diagnosis. So we do have a rapid report mechanism there, but it's not really good quality of data to do the surveillance purpose to see, you know, kind of like a most real time on cancer diagnosis, particularly on the childhood cancer. In terms of the getting data from other states, we do have interstate data agreement in place with all the states in US. In the past, we only had the data exchange agreement with 6 major states, but now last year we expanded to the entire nations to do the data exchange. Depends on how fast the other cancer registry or the cancer registry in other states can provide the data through the national portal to us. So that's how fast we can get the data from other state on New Hampshire residents. So that's about data reporting. And I think that's all I have. In terms of staffing, yes, I just want to emphasize that cancer registry did lost one full-time staff member due to the funding availability, and that person was responsible for contacting the oncology clinic in New Hampshire to push them to do the data reporting. So because of that position now is vacant and due to no funding available. So for that part of work is a little bit delayed on our cancer data report to the cancer registry. So in terms of a staffing part, we do see some difficulty on the cancer registry operation for us to be able to get the timely and also more complete data to the registry. And that's all. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I have some comments based on what Laureen has elicited and based on the presentation, but I'd like to hear if anyone else has questions or comments before I jump in.
I got a question, if that's okay.
Please.
It's more of just a confirmation. First, I just wanted to thank everybody for putting this report together. I'm sure it's been a lot of work, and I appreciate all the work that you've done, and hopefully will continue to do. Just for my own understanding, I'm looking at table 3 in the report, which talks about kidney and renal pelvis cancer in Merrimack, and that's compared to the rest of the state, excluding Merrimack as well as excluding the 9 PFAS exposed towns. Is it still a valid statement that that is considered to be statistically significant? I see here that the SIR is 1.42 and 1.41. The lower numbers of those are above 1.0. So that really doesn't change anything that was concluded back in the 2018 report. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct.
I just wanted to make sure I'm understanding that correctly. And I understand it's hard to make, it's circumstantial evidence to try to link anything together, I think, but in my mind, when you look at this data, you look at other studies that were done on MBD water customers where the PFOA level was double the national average in the average customer's blood, and just the existence of the PFAS in the groundwater at the levels that we have. You know, it's all anecdotal evidence, but I think it all kind of, in my mind, sort of links everything together. So I just wanted to make that confirmation. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Can I just add to that? Great job interpreting the statistics. You're exactly right. A nice job with confidence intervals. I know that's not like a, something everybody always does, but you're exactly right. It didn't change the statistical significance of the excess of kidney cancers. I think you also hit something that's mentioned in the report, but I may not have pulled out, and I think it's worth saying. Really, based on the data, you could sort of look at the data alone and come to the conclusion that we wouldn't recommend the next study. But I think the other things that you pointed out in terms of what's known about the connection between PFAS and other environmental exposures in kidney cancer, and looking at that SIR, that's sort of, we combined those things into making that decision around our recommendation. So if you were to just look at the data, you actually could potentially say, I'm not sure why you recommended that, because you're not seeing any other patterns. But I think you did a nice job of sort of describing the other factors that led to our recommendation.
So if no one else has comments, let me chime in. I'm really pleased to hear there's interest in a phase 3 study, because I think Merrimack presents a particularly elegant situation for us to study deeper. Virtually everybody is on public water. There are some exceptions. And we know that the areas, the upland areas served by wells 4 and 5, well before testing, had very high levels of exposure compared to the rest of the town. And in some instances, not just looking at cancers, but there have been generations exposed to well 4 and 5 levels of contamination. And so I think a well-designed study might look at a host of medical conditions, but it would have to be a well-designed study, because a poorly designed study is going to invalidate results permanently. So I certainly would be excited to hear about work within an academic institution. The unfortunate part is you're not dealing with a large metropolitan area with a population of 1 million. So whatever data results in a correlation is going to be somewhat limited. Some of the other problems, we're going to have to look to national literature and international literature to really understand what's going on with PFAS. The other things that I would simply reinforce, which we've said before, is medical education is really important, and taking a patient history and knowing what areas of the region the patient comes from is important, as well as blood testing for the populations at risk. So great piece of science that you all have done. Very appreciative. I think we will look at the reports in more detail, probably come back with some questions through Dr. Bush. Dr. Woods.
Thank you. My apologies for being delayed in joining you. We're actually in Nashville right now. I was taking a 4-year-old to daycare. So, an observation, a couple of observations and a comment. Really appreciate the robust discussion about a very difficult data collection problem. And to me, as important, the willingness to notice the limitations. And I think that's critical to know that we have limitations, because we're looking at it, to me, a couple of comments. We're looking at a situation where we want to look at causation. And as the old verbiage goes, correlation does not mean causation. And I think our robust discussion reflects that awareness, although we're not saying it every time. Just one other comment, though. I think we do also need to be aware of one other dimension that is underlying this, and many of you probably are aware of it, but some may not be, so I will mention it. And that are some of the epigenetic factors that come into play in this situation. Simple problems like you may be familiar with methylation of DNA, which can be transmitted, and other epigenetic factors that predilect one to a cancerous condition, and maybe unrelated. And those, I think, will come to the fore as we go forward, and certainly nothing that we can collect data about. But I think we need, as a committee, to be aware of these factors, besides the ones that we've has been so well articulated here today. So I just compliment to everybody for that level of awareness and willingness to be self-introspective in that regard. But just a further word of caution about the epigenetics as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. We'll move on in our agenda. I actually communicated with Attorney Brooks regarding his input today. That turns out to be fortunate, because I was overly ambitious about what we could get done, and we'll get some input from him at a later time. And so I would like to take this a little bit out of order and put Mr. Wimsatt on the spot next.
Right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And I'll just jump right into the New Hampshire DES update. So starting as we typically do with our air division update, as far as permitting activities go, DES is currently reviewing 2 permit applications, drafting a state permit to operate. Once that draft permit is complete, the department will publish a notice of the opening of a public comment period and pre-schedule a public hearing to obtain feedback on the draft permit. Then with regard to stack testing activities, I probably reported this last time as well, but just as a reminder, the stack testing took place on August 24th and 25th of this year, past year. And DES had 2 experienced staff members present to observe the method in which the samples were collected and the operation of the towers at the facility during the stack test. The oxidizer didn't encounter any issues, and the stack test was completed as designed. DES received the stack test report And there's a link. There'll be a link to that in my minutes that I'll provide to the secretary. And on October 4th, 2022, we received that report, and we're in the process of reviewing that report. And then with regard to bypass operations, since the last update to the commission, Saint-Gobain has submitted one permit deviation report. And for the period hourly block of 3:05 a.m. to 4:05 a.m. on December 21st, the Saint-Gobain RTO averaged 1,830.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And the permit condition requires a minimum of 1,832 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, that was a 1 hour block where the required temperature was missed by about 1.6 degrees. And there's a link on One Stop will be available tomorrow. So by the time you get the minutes for this and you see the link, that link will be live. So there'll be a link to that report in the notes that you get for the meeting. And then moving on to the Waste Management Division's update. On June 29th of last year, DES received a work plan for the installation of point of entry treatment systems at the properties identified in our June 23rd agreement. And DES reviewed and approved that work plan with stipulations in a letter dated August 22nd. DES met with Saint-Gobain on September 13th to discuss our comments and received a revised work plan at the end of September. We reviewed and approved the work plan with stipulations in a letter dated October 5th. And then in late November, Saint-Gobain finalized a contract with a water filtration system installation contractor, that's Second Wind Water Systems, Inc., and is currently working on a contract with a second POET contractor. Letters were mailed out to 229 property owners in Bedford and Merrimack on November 29th. Notifying them of the filtration system contractor and requesting that property owners set up a pre-installation inspection. As of January 4th, just early this month, 156 residents have contacted Second Wind to complete the pre-installation inspection, and 138 inspections have been scheduled. Of those 138 scheduled inspections, 54 have been completed, and 10 POET treatment systems have been installed to date. Second Wind is currently installing systems at a rate of 5 per week and plans to ramp up to a rate of 10 per week later this month. Saint-Gobain's contractors have indicated they believe all the POETs can be installed in less than 1 year. On July 12th, DES received a remedial action implementation report. And again, there'll be a link to that documented the provision of alternate water for each property described in the original 2018 consent decree. And DES is still in the process of reviewing that report and will provide comment as needed. Saint-Gobain is proceeding with design work for water line installations for the towns of Litchfield, Bedford, and Merrimack. These include areas with existing water lines where homes require connections to the water mains in the street and areas where new water mains will be installed. Design packages were submitted in December to the water utilities for review and construction, and construction is anticipated to occur in late winter, early spring, depending on weather conditions. Saint-Gobain is working with a water provider and currently evaluating the feasibility of the proposed water line extensions for the town of Londonderry. A contract to complete a conceptual design has been executed and is anticipated to be completed in the spring. Following that and the determination of feasibility, the remedies will go to final design. And on August 17th, DES met with Saint-Gobain to discuss the requested application for a groundwater management permit and groundwater management zone. It was determined that Saint-Gobain wouldn't be able to submit the application by the due date of August. And DES met with Saint-Gobain, DOJ, and attorneys for Saint-Gobain on October 4th to discuss further sampling and the application for the groundwater management permit. And those discussions regarding the application for the permit and long-term monitoring plan are ongoing at this time. Following the transition of areas in Londonderry to the new bottled water contractor, the out-of-water calls to DES have essentially been eliminated. Saint-Gobain continues to transfer more homes over to a new bottled water delivery contractor based on the geographic area. And so currently there are about 340 properties that have been transferred over to the new contractor that are all contained within the town of Londonderry. The remaining homes in Londonderry, which is about 75 properties, are to be transferred by the end of this month. And DES will continue to monitor that situation, but we're very pleased that that has seen some significant improvements. So on November 16th, DES completed its review of the November 4th proposal that we received from Saint-Gobain to remedy additional water supply wells within the consent decree area. And this agreement provides water line connections for POETs to 44 additional properties within the area of impacts by Saint-Gobain. And remedies included in the new agreement include the following. In Bedford, there would be point of entry treatment systems for an additional 21 properties and water line connections for 2 additional properties. In Hudson, point of entry treatment systems for 4 additional properties. In Litchfield, point of entry treatment systems for 3 properties and water line connection for an additional 4 properties. And in the south area of Londonderry, point of entry treatment systems for an additional 8 properties. And in the town of Merrimack, water line connections for 2 additional properties. So moving on to water supply well sampling summary. Saint-Gobain presented a work plan for residential sampling and has since submitted 16 addenda to that sampling plan. The 16th on November 30th. DES reviewed and approved addendum 16 on December 8th. So we continue to express concern and a need for additional sampling and addenda to complete sampling of all the water supply wells within the consent decree area. And we are working to identify a key group of what we believe would be the most high priority wells for sampling out of that group. And we expect to begin that I probably should have something to report on that at the next meeting. As of December 28th, and this is updated to include the information reflected in addendum 16, there have been a total of 3,833 properties identified for sampling, and that's 31 more November report that I provided. 3,820 access agreements have been sent with a return rate of about 69%, and that's 30 more than the November report. 2,379 samples have been collected from water supply wells, and that's 4 more than the last report. And 1,023 properties have been offered bottled water, and that's no change from the November report. So on to site investigation. At the site proper, Saint-Gobain's consultant conducted, as I reported last time, the post RTO stormwater sampling on November 11th. As of January 4th, the laboratory had not provided a final data package, so that's a little late. Apparently the laboratory is doing some further, the work's all been done, but they're doing further QA/QC review of the data. So the report for that is due to DES. It's tied to the receipt of the analytical data. So once that data is received, which we anticipate would be quite soon, they'd be due to send a report to us within 6 weeks of that. And then, as we reported previously, the remedial action plan is due to DES 120 days after Saint-Gobain's consultant receives analytical results from the stormwater sampling. So again, tied to receipt of that data, but assuming that comes soon, we would expect that the remedial action plan should be submitted sometime in May of this year. And that concludes my report. I would note that we did talk about providing and we showed you last time some proposed graphical depictions for tracking the remedy implementation. And it would be our anticipation that we will, since it's just underway, we don't have it for this month, but for the next month's meeting, I would anticipate we'd start showing those graphics to reflect the progress made, and particularly in getting the POETs and the water line connections completed.
Thank you. And I would just add those graphic representations, especially when it got down to looking at minutes, were very helpful.
Good.
Just as a refresher as well as condensing information. So does anyone have questions or comments for Mr. Wimsatt? If not, I do, and I don't know if you know, but can you approximate when the public comment period would be scheduled or for the permit?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure how close they are to that, but I can certainly find out for next time. Or perhaps it will be known by next meeting.
Okay. Yeah, just so we can let the public know.
Sure.
Thanks. Lorraine?
I have a question about, as you know, all the work the EPA is doing, and I heard the MCLs are delayed till maybe the end of March. They're in the White House and being looked at. I'm sure there's all kinds of pushback. So that we're still waiting. But in the meantime, they are getting information out there, and they just added 9 more PFAS to the toxic release inventory list, I think just last week. So my question is, when I read that, I thought to myself, back in the beginning, when we were getting our head around this in the early ages of the investigation, I remember seeing data like, the pipe that went into the brook and the river, and that was tested. And there was a list, there of all these PFAS, at least what you could test for at that time. And it totaled some insane amount of money for the discharge into waterways. So when we look at this addition of PFAS to the TURI list, clearly it's not really going to be regulatory, but the intent there is for states and communities to know, we have a right to know, right, what is going into our environment. So it's confusing in New Hampshire over, who permits, the federal permits, deferring and all that. So what do you do, or where do we get that information, So if they are required, who's required, so when we add something to the, it's about discharges, environmental releases, and maybe waste stream, right? That's what goes on that list to report. Does that just go into the, EPA system unless there's volume exemptions, or where do we get that information with that addition? Because I did read the 9 more that are on the list, and it was of interest to me given what Saint-Gobain does and where they pivoted to in terms of chemical formulations. So how does that, what am I trying to say here? How does that requirement from the EPA, right, get implemented? What do we do with these new rulemakings when they're adding things on as requirements? Where does that information go, and what do we do about it? Do we do anything about it, or do we just get more information? How do we use it?
Those are great questions. And I confess, I'm not
clearly spoken, but it's not my area of expertise. I'm a social worker, so I'm trying to get my point across, but I think you got it.
I think you got it across really well. I confess, I'm not an expert on that either. And I think what I'd like to do, I'm glad you're asking the question. I'd like to look into that a little more, because I'm afraid if I try to give you an answer now, I'm really just going to be not really educating you very well. And I think it's certainly the case that for toxic release, there are certain thresholds that often don't get triggered for most companies or most dischargers, so that there may not be any particular data that comes as a result of those being added. But I want to look into that a little more and try to give you a workman-like answer here rather than make something up. So let me put that on my list, and I will see what I can learn about that and see if we can
how we can understand as a community. I guess what I really, the real bottom line is, it's important to us, given what we learned that we didn't know, to really be informed in the future as to what is coming at us, right? What's coming into our environment. It's important for people to know that for their own. It's important for the town or wastewater facility. It's important for the MVD. It's important for everyone to know what are we dealing with and how do we know when it's updated, because ultimately there are regulations and we have to pay for and design remediation of some sort, be it wastewater, be it drinking water. And it really behooves us as a community to really get that information, because without knowing that we should be looking for it, we may not be addressing, you can see the history in Merrimack. We have done a really good job being a step ahead, right? in terms of what we've done to protect ourselves. And that is just astonishing what we've done together as a community. But it came from residents spending endless amounts of hours together, informing each other, becoming their own experts and saying, what do we do about this? Because we all agree that we need to not have this exposure. So I guess, we can't just say, hey, problem solved, because we see some patterns in our wells. I don't know if you're following this, Mike, but, the MVD is, very transparent in their data right now. And we see things like PFBA and PFHPA coming into wells 4 and 5 that Saint-Gobain is responsible for 5 years of taking care of at one level and coming out of the engineered state-of-the-art supposed system at higher levels that are going in. So, so whatever is being used and whatever is going into the environment becomes an engineering problem. And we want to engineer for exactly what is there. I've learned over the last few years, water chemistry is very complex and everything. This is not simple. So when I read that, I thought, oh, this is really important to us, because if we don't know what's going on in the manufacturing stream and what's being released, we are spending millions of dollars in this community. And I don't want other communities to go through this around us. And we're filtering, thinking we're safe, but now we're starting to find out it's not so simple. And what do? Do we add on to our systems and spend more money? So we need to design for anticipating what is there if we can. Maybe that's not realistic, but I think it's a really important piece of the puzzle, because, we were all blindsided by this. All of us were, and we need to be on top of what the full picture is, what the whole panel is and the amounts, because those amounts from those pipes going in were significant, right? Years ago, it wasn't just groundwater from deposition at Saint-Gobain site, which had 64,000 PPT for PFOA alone, but going into waterways, and that's an aquifer protection zone. That still blows my mind how this facility sits on an aquifer protection zone. So it's all, so think about how you can really look at that information, that new requirement, how does it apply to us, and how can we get that information without having to go on that new EPA analytic tool, which I looked at it and I just went, oh God, I want you guys to do that and somebody to come and give us a report so we can just get the information. So I would appreciate that. And I think our community and Dawn and, in the town can probably put that to good use. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, Lorraine, the 2 compounds that MVD is seeing coming through the filters is PFBA, PFPEA. Those are the 2 that are breaking through the filters. They're short chains. And that's kind of what MVD and customers are evaluating is, do we change the media out more frequently in order to keep those compounds non-detect,
Yeah.
So.
But aren't they, but changing it more frequently really bothers me too. Maybe the state can give some consult, to someone there. We have some pretty amazing people, working up there in Concord, because didn't I read it right in some of the reports, Dawn, that I think PFBA, I'm going by my memory here, so I may not be right, coming into the filter system at about 8 parts and coming out at 18?
It was like 12, but yeah, there's some kind of, it's called rollover.
Increase. So it's going through the system at one level. And that reminds me of wastewater facilities. In wastewater, we hear that the influent is one number and the effluent is concentrated and comes out higher. But that's not fair to compare those systems. So it really stunned me to think that what's coming to my home that I now have to figure out what to do about is higher than what's going into the wells, And if that same pattern happens at 7 and 8 and 3 and 2 or whatever one is open there, as they get up and running after a couple years, that says, is the medium? Is it the wells closer to Saint-Gobain that something's happening? We need some help, I think, from the state to better understand that, so we just don't vote on, spending more money and saying swap the medium, more frequently. Maybe there are better systems as they have in Portsmouth, the resin beds and ion exchange and all those things. And why spend that money if that isn't going to work either? So we're at a point now where we have some data coming in that's it's puzzling, And it's troubling. It's troubling. You know, I don't want, you know, the whole town agrees, you know, we do not want exposure of any sort, ideally, right? But we can't just keep swapping out the GAC. So we need some help from DES and some sort of consultation on this puzzle before we go to vote, I think.
Right. Thank you, Mike. Representative Mooney, thank you for putting together the summary of legislation. Do you want to just briefly breeze through that?
Just very briefly, Mr. Chairman, the 2023 legislative session has begun. I did compile a chart, a legislative tracker of bills that will be going through the process related to PFAS. I shared the document. It's a Google document with those on the commission. I appreciate the feedback, especially from Laureen Allen, who added a couple of bills that I missed and subtracted a few, so that was very helpful. If anybody else sees anything, again, this is a complete work in process document, so work in progress document. So if anybody sees anything else, let me know. As of last night, no hearings were scheduled on these bills yet. And also the Senate has different timelines for their bills. So I don't think we have those fully loaded in this tracker, but they are, the ones that I know of are mentioned there. If there are any listeners and viewers to our commission meeting today or in the near future who would like to be added to this document, please let me know and I will share it with them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any, Dr. Woods?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. People may or may not be aware, I am no longer a representative. I'm on the commission representing the medical society, so therefore I remain seated. But not that I'm not interested in the legislation, but we underwent a change of address. We moved, and as a consequence, I was unable to run for re-election. So my roles have changed a bit, but just for a point of clarification, so that I'm not confused with the role that Representative Mooney plays. Thank you.
Thank you.
State House will miss you, Representative.
Oh, you're very kind.
But we're very pleased to continue to have you as the Medical Society representative. I think at this point, not knowing who fully is going to be on this commission, it's a little early to talk about subcommittee rosters and chairpersons, so we'll defer that. Our next scheduled meeting is going to be Friday, February 10th at 10 a.m. When I know who is going to be on this commission from the House of Representatives and Senate, we'll touch base with each of you to determine whether there's a more optimal time for our meeting, but for the time being, we will keep it as everyone has expected it to be on the second Friday of each month at 10. And with that, I'm not aware of any public comments or concerns that have been brought up. And unless anyone else has anything else, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care.